Black CEO, insulted at Billionaire's mansion that night. She made their empire vanish. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. I'm sorry, but you don't belong here. The words sliced through the air, as harsh and cold as a slap in the face. Alicia Walker, Black CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, stood at the entrance of a lavish mansion, her black dress simple yet elegant, clearly out of place among the extravagantly dressed guests. They were all wearing designer suits, sipping champagne, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Alicia's heart raced as she processed what Vincent Hunt, the billionaire host, had just said. He didn't know her name, didn't know her power, but he would soon. You really think you can just walk in here? Vincent scoffed, looking Alicia up and down like she was nothing more than a trespasser. The guests around them whispered and giggled, clearly amused at what they saw as her audacity to be there. Alicia didn't flinch, but the sting of the insult burned deep. I don't need to explain myself to you, she replied calmly, her voice steady, but beneath it simmered a quiet fury. The guests paused, sensing something was off, but unable to put their finger on it. Call security, Vincent sneered, turning to walk away, dismissing her as nothing more than an inconvenience. But Alicia wasn't the type to shrink away, not anymore. She took out her phone and dialed her assistant, Nia. Activate Protocol 6, she said with a controlled voice. The night was about to take a turn these people would never see coming. Alicia had played by their rules for too long. Now it was her turn to rewrite the game. No loud outbursts, no drama, just a quiet force they wouldn't be able to ignore. The storm was coming, and Alicia was ready to face it. Stay tuned to see how everything changes in real time. Hit that like button if you're ready for the power shift. Minutes later, Alicia stood at the foot of the grand staircase, her posture poised and unshaken. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, but she didn't waver. She knew the truth. She didn't need to prove anything to these people. She wasn't the outsider, here they were. As Vincent's phone buzzed, his eyes flickered with confusion as he read the message. Alicia Walker, CEO, Walker Enterprises. The woman you just insulted owns this mansion. The room went dead silent. He looked up, his face pale, but by then it was too late. Alicia approached him, her steps measured, her eyes unwavering. You called me a fraud, she said, her voice steady, but filled with authority. In the company I own. Vincent's jaw dropped, and he took a step back, stumbling as he processed the weight of her words. But Alicia didn't give him time to respond. She stepped forward, not to intimidate him, but to make it clear. This was her world, and he was just a guest in it. This is your last mistake, she said, low enough for only the closest people to hear. She wasn't here to argue, she was here to reclaim her space. The guests who had once smirked now stood frozen, their faces pale as the reality of who Alicia was began to sink in. This was her empire, and they were about to watch it crumble. Alicia didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to yell. The truth spoke louder than any words she could say. And as Nia quietly worked behind the scenes, activating a chain of events, Alicia knew the night was far from over. This mansion, this empire, everything these people held dear, it was all about to disappear. What Vincent didn't know was that the game had already ended, and the victor was standing right in front of him. Alicia Walker. The room was still buzzing with whispers, as Alicia Walker stood calmly in the center of the mansion's grand hall. The air felt thick with tension, and her presence was like a magnet, pulling the attention of everyone in the room. Vincent Hunt, still reeling from the shock of her words, stood across the room, his face flushed with embarrassment, but his arrogance still clung to him like a second skin. He had underestimated her, but Alicia wasn't here to prove anything to him, nor to anyone else. She had already won. The night was hers, and she would take back everything that was unjustly taken from her, starting with the empire these people had built on the backs of others. As she looked around the room, the weight of what she was about to do settled in, but she didn't show it. Alicia had learned to control her emotions, to turn them into something far more powerful than just rage or humiliation. She had learned to turn it into a weapon, and tonight, she would use that weapon to reshape the very foundation of this event, this mansion, and everyone in it. She took out her phone again, quickly texting her assistant Nia, *, prepare the files. Prepare the contracts, *. Within moments, her phone buzzed back with a simple response, *. Ready, ma'am, *. That was all Alicia needed. With a calm, steady hand, she put the phone away. And then, without missing a beat, she made her way towards the center of the room, where a large group of guests stood, still gossiping about her. They hadn't realized that they were witnessing something far greater than a woman being insulted. They were witnessing a revolution, one that would happen quietly, without fanfare, but with consequences that would ripple through every corner of their lives. As she passed the guests, they parted for her like the Red Sea. She wasn't just walking, she was taking back control, step by step, leaving no room for anyone to challenge her authority. Vincent, still talking to a few people at the far end of the room, noticed Alicia approaching. His face twisted in disbelief, as if he still couldn't grasp what was happening. But Alicia was done with games. She stopped in front of him, her eyes locking onto his with the precision of a hunter stalking its prey. Vincent's smug smile faltered as he looked at her. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly, but still trying to maintain the control he thought he had over this situation. Alicia didn't answer him immediately. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a set of documents. Without saying a word, she handed them to him. The documents were printed, crisp, and official. As Vincent flipped through them, his face drained of color. He read the first line aloud, * Summit Enterprises, ownership rights transferred to Alicia Walker, *. He looked up at her in a panic, trying to process what was happening. This can't be real. Alicia simply smiled, a cold, knowing smile. "It's real, Vincent," she said, her voice low, but carrying the weight of every word. "And you've just lost everything you built." The silence that followed was deafening. The room, once full of whispers and laughter, was now completely still, as if the entire mansion had frozen in place. Guests looked from one another, unsure of how to react, their discomfort palpable. Alicia had just made it clear to everyone in the room that they were no longer in control. She was. "You'll find that your company has been dissolved," Alicia continued, her words crisp and deliberate. "And every asset you own is now mine, including this mansion." She paused, letting her words sink in. The shock on Vincent's face was all the confirmation Alicia needed. "But don't worry," she added, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You'll have plenty of time to reflect on how you treated people who didn't look like you." There was a long pause before anyone spoke, the weight of Alicia's words hanging in the air. Finally, someone in the crowd muttered, "She really did it." It was the moment of truth. The truth that Alicia had always known. Power wasn't about money or status. It was about control. And the people who had thought they were untouchable were about to learn a very hard lesson. She turned away from Vincent, her back straight and unwavering. "Take care of it," she said to Nia over the phone, before hanging up. The night wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. "I'm sorry, Vincent," Alicia said, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of every word she spoke. "But you had a chance to make things right, and you failed." The room was silent, the guests frozen in place, unsure of what was happening. They had watched as Alicia, once dismissed and insulted, had just taken everything from Vincent Hunt and his empire. The look on Vincent's face was one of pure disbelief, his once confident, self-assured demeanor completely shattered. He had never expected this. He had never imagined that the woman he humiliated could have this kind of power. His hands trembled as he tried to process the legal documents Alicia had handed him. The papers were the final blow to his company, to his wealth, and to his status. "You can't do this," Vincent stammered, his voice unsteady. "I built this company from the ground up." Alicia didn't flinch. She had heard this story too many times. "You built it on the backs of people like me," she said, her eyes locking onto his. People you thought you could treat like dirt. People you thought would never have the power to take it all away. She looked around the room, her gaze sweeping over the shocked faces of the guests who had watched her every move. Some were beginning to murmur, trying to make sense of what was happening, but Alicia stood tall, unshaken, and confident. You thought because of who I am, or how I look, that I would never be able to touch you, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. But you were wrong, and now you'll see what happens when someone like me is no longer silent. The guests began to shift, their unease growing. They were witnessing something monumental, a reckoning they hadn't expected, and couldn't stop. Vincent's face turned pale as he tried to gather his composure, but it was clear to everyone in the room that the game had changed. I don't care what you think, he spat, trying to regain some control, but Alicia wasn't having it. She raised her hand, silencing him. I don't need your approval, she said, her tone cold. What you've built isn't worth the price you've paid to keep it standing. She turned her back on him and looked toward the door, where Nia entered with a briefcase in hand, the final piece of the puzzle in place. Nia had already secured everything. The mansion, the assets, the accounts, all under Alicia's name. The system had already been reset, and Vincent's empire was nothing but a shell now. It's over, Alicia said, turning back to face him. Your empire is gone. You're left with nothing. Vincent opened his mouth to protest, but Alicia raised her hand again, stopping him. I don't want to hear it, she said firmly. You had your chance to do the right thing, but you chose to humiliate me instead. Now, you will pay the price. Your name will be erased from every contract, every deal, every business relationship you've ever built, and you will never have access to this world again. The guests who had been silent, watching in disbelief, were now whispering to each other, some in support of Alicia, others in shock at the turn of events. But Alicia wasn't finished. She turned toward the crowd, her voice now addressing everyone in the room. Let this be a lesson to all of you, she said. It doesn't matter how much money you have, or how many people you step on to get to the top. You can't hide behind your privilege forever. One day, the people you've hurt will have the power to take it all away. And when that day comes, you won't be able to stop them. Alicia's words hung in the air like a warning, and the room was still. No one dared to move or speak, as if acknowledging the truth she had just delivered. Vincent, now visibly shaken, stood there, a broken man, realizing that his empire had crumbled in the span of a few minutes, brought down by the very woman he had so carelessly insulted. He tried to salvage what little pride he had left, but Alicia wasn't interested. She had already won. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Alicia said coldly as she turned to leave, walking out of the mansion as effortlessly as she had entered. Behind her, the sound of Vincent's empire collapsing was deafening, and the guests who had witnessed it knew they would never forget the moment they saw true power in action. Alicia had taken what was rightfully hers, and in doing so, she had shown everyone in the room what happens when you underestimate a black CEO. I am done here, Alicia said quietly, her voice calm but laced with power. She turned and walked out of the mansion, the heavy sound of her heels echoing through the grand hall. Behind her, Vincent Hunt stood frozen, his mind racing, trying to process everything that had just happened. His empire, the life he had built, was slipping through his fingers, all because of one woman he had underestimated. He wanted to shout, to chase after her, but something in the pit of his stomach told him it was already too late. As Alicia stepped out of the mansion, her phone buzzed. It was Nia, her assistant, confirming that everything was in motion. The assets, the properties, the accounts, all of it was now officially transferred under Alicia's name. Her fingers tapped the screen, sending a quick reply. Asterisk, good. Continue with the next phase. Lock everything down. Asterisk, the next phase was already underway. With a final glance at the mansion, Alicia made her way to the sleek black car waiting outside, the night air cool against her skin. She was calm, but inside, her heart was still racing with the adrenaline of what she had just accomplished. No one, not Vincent or anyone in that room, would ever forget this night. The stakes had been high, but she had played her cards perfectly. Alicia knew exactly how these people thought, how they operated. They were used to being untouchable, their privilege and power shielding them from the consequences of their actions. But tonight, Everything had changed. The tables had turned, and they were the ones who would now be left scrambling. As the car sped through the city, Alicia thought about what had led her to this moment. The years of hard work, the constant battles against prejudice and discrimination, and the quiet rage that had fueled her success. She had always known she would get to this point, but seeing it happen, seeing it unfold in real time, was a different kind of victory. The people who had looked down on her, who had dismissed her based on her race and her gender, were now watching as she dismantled their world in a matter of minutes. Vincent, with all his wealth and arrogance, had been nothing but a pawn in her game. He had thought he could humiliate her, put her in her place, but Alicia had been playing a much bigger game. She had never been the one to shout or make noise. She had always known that the real power was in silence, in patience, in waiting for the right moment to strike. And now that moment had come. The car pulled up to a private building, and Alicia stepped out, her posture straight, her demeanor unwavering. Inside, Nia was already waiting with the latest reports, the next steps, the plans to continue the takeover. Alicia smiled faintly. This was just the beginning. She had only scratched the surface of the changes she was about to bring. As she entered the building, her mind raced with possibilities. She would ensure that every single one of Vincent's businesses would be dismantled, not by force, but by sheer will, by proving that no one was above the law, that no one was above accountability. It was time for a reckoning. She had always been underestimated, but now, Alicia Walker would be the one to reshape the world these elitists had built. And she wasn't going to stop until every single one of them understood that power was no longer in their hands. Power was in hers. I didn't expect this to happen so quickly, Alicia thought as she sat at the sleek conference table in her private office. The weight of everything she had just done, the power she had seized, the empire she had dismantled, was beginning to sink in. It was the calm after the storm. But Alicia was no stranger to the quiet moments of reflection that followed her victories. Every step she had taken, every decision, had led to this point. She had watched Vincent Hunt crumble before her very eyes, his empire reduced to nothing in the span of a few short minutes. The mansion he once owned, the businesses he had run, they were all hers now. But it wasn't just the material wealth that mattered. It was the satisfaction of proving a point to every person who had ever doubted her, who had ever thought she didn't belong in the rooms they inhabited. The city outside her office was beginning to wake up, the early morning light casting long shadows across the skyline, but Alicia was already deep into her next phase of the plan. Nia entered the room, the assistant's footsteps soft but purposeful. She placed a thick folder on the table, its contents secure and neatly organized. Alicia glanced at it, then back at Nia. "What's next?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with determination. "The corporate audit has been initiated. All of Vincent's businesses are under review, and the legal teams are moving to seize his assets. The press release is prepared. We can make the announcement whenever you're ready," Nia replied. Alicia nodded. She had been expecting this. The timing had to be perfect. They couldn't allow Vincent to gather any support, any allies. His world needed to crash and burn before he could rebuild. "Good," Alicia said, pushing the folder aside. "Let's proceed, but we need to control the narrative. Make sure that when the press release goes out, it's not just about the financial takeover. It's about what they tried to do to me, what they tried to do to people like me. I want the world to see how easily they thought they could crush someone who didn't fit their idea of success." Nia gave her a sharp nod, clearly understanding the gravity of the task. "I'll handle it," she said, before turning to leave. Alicia watched her go, her mind already turning to the next steps. This wasn't just about taking down Vincent. It was about sending a message to the world. She had made it clear to him, to everyone in that room the other night, that power wasn't just about money or status. Power was about control, and control came from knowing exactly when to strike, when to remain silent, and when to expose the cracks in the system. Alicia's thoughts were interrupted by the buzz of her phone. She picked it up without hesitation, reading the latest message. It was from her team, confirming that all assets had been transferred successfully and that the final documents had been signed. Vincent was finished, but Alicia didn't feel satisfaction, not yet. What she felt was the anticipation of what was to come next. This was only the beginning. As much as the city was waking up to her victory, Alicia was already looking ahead to the work that still needed to be done. The people who had spent years building their empire on the backs of others, on people like her, needed to see just how easily it could all be taken away. The world wasn't ready for the changes Alicia had planned, but she was. She had spent her whole life being underestimated, written off because of her race and her gender. But now, Alicia had the power to rewrite the rules, to break the system that had been built to keep people like her out, and she wasn't about to let anyone stand in her way. As she stood up from the table, walking toward the large windows overlooking the city, Alicia smiled to herself. She had won. But now, it was time to show the world that the future was hers. The empire was crumbling, and in its place, she was going to build something far stronger, something far more just. No one, not even the wealthiest of billionaires, would ever be able to take that away from her. "I'm not done yet," Alicia whispered to herself as she stood in front of the window, staring out at the city below. The early morning light was casting a soft glow on the buildings, but her mind was far from peaceful. It was time to finish what she had started. The takeover had been swift, but she knew this was only the first battle. The real challenge would be dismantling the legacy these men had built, exposing the corruption and discrimination that had allowed them to climb to the top, while people like her were kept at the bottom. She had been dismissed, humiliated, and overlooked for far too long, but now, she would be the one to reshape the narrative. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Nia again, sending an update on the press coverage. The first wave of articles had gone live, but Alicia wasn't satisfied yet. The media had only scratched the surface. They needed to understand the full scope of the damage these men had caused, the systemic racism, the exploitation, and the lives that had been destroyed in the process. She couldn't let them control the story. It had to be told on her terms. Alicia immediately dialed Nia. "Make sure the press knows this isn't just about a hostile takeover," she said, her voice firm. "This is about justice. This is about what they did to me, to all the people they thought they could silence. Make sure that message gets out there loud and clear." Nia responded quickly, her voice steady. "Understood. I'll ensure the press release is updated with the full story. We'll have full control of the narrative." Alicia nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She had carefully planned every detail of this operation, but it wasn't just about business. This was personal. She had endured years of injustice, but now, everything was about to change. "Good," Alicia said, ending the call. She turned away from the window and walked to the sleek desk in the corner of her office, pulling up the latest financial reports. She studied the numbers with precision, her mind calculating the next move. Vincent Hunt might have lost everything, but there were others like him, others who still held power, still held wealth, still thought they were untouchable. They were the ones Alicia was coming for next. With every step, she was getting closer to making them all pay for their actions. Alicia had never been the type to back down, but now, with all the power in her hands, she was more determined than ever. She picked up the phone once again and called her legal team. "I want the full audit on every company that's connected to Vincent's network," she said without hesitation. "And I want it done now. We need to track every dollar, every shady deal, every illegal contract. These people need to face the consequences of their actions, and I want the world to see what they've been hiding for all these years." She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Make sure everything is documented, every single detail, no stone unturned." "Of course, Alicia," came the reply from the other end. "We're on it. You'll have everything you need." Alicia hung up and leaned back in her chair, her mind already moving ahead to the next phase. This wasn't just about taking down Vincent, it was about making a statement. It was about showing the world that no one, no matter how powerful or rich, was beyond accountability. Alicia wasn't just going to rebuild her life. She was going to tear down the systems that had kept her, and so many others like her, from reaching their full potential. And she wasn't going to stop until she had dismantled every last bit of the empire these men had spent their lives constructing. The battle was far from over, but Alicia was more than ready for whatever came next. Her moment had arrived, and she was going to make sure the world knew exactly who was in charge now. "I'm not just taking down a few people," Alicia thought as she sat at her desk. scanning through the massive files of information that Nia had delivered. She knew this was bigger than just her. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about changing the system itself. The corporate world had been built on exploitation, on the backs of people who were deemed invisible, and Alicia was going to make sure that the world saw that. Her eyes flicked over the legal documents, her fingers tracing the details of the shady dealings Vincent had been involved in. Every illegal contract, every corrupt deal, every life affected by his and his colleagues' selfish actions, they were all here, black and white, ready to be exposed. Alicia's phone buzzed, snapping her back to reality. It was a message from her media team. Asterisk, the press release has gone viral. The story is breaking in all major outlets. Asterisk. A satisfied smile played at the corners of her mouth. This was exactly what she wanted. The world needed to see what Vincent and his colleagues had been up to for all these years. This wasn't just a hostile takeover. This was a complete dismantling of everything they had built on the backs of people like her. She had been silenced for far too long, but now, her voice would be heard, and it would shake their empire to its very core. As Alicia read through the reports, the door to her office opened, and Nia stepped inside, her expression focused. The media is already starting to pick up on the real story. People are starting to ask questions about the corruption. This is only the beginning. Alicia looked up, her gaze sharp and resolute. Good. But we need to make sure this doesn't just fade away. We need to keep the pressure on, Nia. We need to expose every last detail. Nia nodded. It's already in motion. We're contacting the victims of Vincent's schemes, the employees he mistreated, the contractors he cheated. We're collecting their stories, and we're going public with it. Alicia's eyes gleamed with determination. Make sure every person who has been affected by this gets their chance to speak. Let the world hear their voices. Let them understand that this wasn't just a few bad apples. This was a system designed to keep people like us down. Alicia paused, leaning back in her chair, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. And once we have that, we start the real work. It's not just about taking them down, it's about rebuilding. We need to create something new, something that will never let this happen again. We need to make sure that no one ever has to go through what I went through, what so many others went through. Nia's face softened with respect. We're going to change the game, Alicia. You've already started. Alicia stood up, walking over to the window. The sun had fully risen, and the city was coming to life, just as she was. She could feel the momentum shifting, could feel the energy in the air. This was no longer just about her or about Vincent. It was about everyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or discriminated against because of their race, their gender, or their status. Alicia had always known that she would be the one to change things, but now, she could see it happening before her eyes. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every single person who had ever been told they didn't belong, every person who had been denied a seat at the table, and she wasn't going to stop until the table was overturned, until every last barrier was torn down. Let's do this, Alicia said with quiet determination, her voice cutting through the room like steel. Nia nodded and turned to leave, but Alicia caught her by the arm. One more thing, she said, her eyes locking onto Nia's. Make sure Vincent knows this wasn't personal. It was about justice. Let him see how it feels to be powerless, to be exposed for what he really is. Nia gave a sharp nod, understanding the weight of Alicia's words. I'll make sure he gets the message. Alicia watched Nia leave, and for a moment, she let herself imagine the future. It wasn't a dream anymore. It was real. She had the power now, and nothing was going to stand in her way. The pressure was mounting, but Alicia had never felt more in control. She sat in her private office, overlooking the city that was now buzzing with news about her takeover. She had orchestrated this from the shadows, and now, the light was shining on the truth on everything Vincent Hunt and his colleagues had done to manipulate the system and keep people like her from rising to the top. The media was relentless, covering every angle of the story, dissecting each shady deal, and highlighting the faces of those who had suffered under Vincent's rule. The public was starting to see just how deep the corruption went, but Alicia knew that this was just the beginning. It wasn't enough for her to simply take Vincent down. She had to make sure that the system he built would never be able to function the way it had before. She had to break it completely. The door to her office opened, and Nia walked in, holding a tablet in her hands. "We've got the statements from the employees who were wronged," Nia said, setting the tablet down in front of Alicia. "They're ready to go public, and we've already scheduled interviews with some of the major outlets. This is about to get even bigger." Alicia nodded, her eyes scanning the statements. They were powerful. Each one told a story of exploitation, of being ignored, of being told they didn't belong. She had seen the same stories unfold in her own life, but now, these voices would be heard. "Good," Alicia said, tapping her fingers on the desk as she thought about the next steps. "But we need more. We need to show the world that this isn't just about one man's empire. This is about a system that has been built to hold people down. I want the public to know how deep it goes, how many others are complicit in this. Vincent isn't the only one who needs to pay." Nia gave a sharp nod. "We're already digging into the connections, Alicia. The board members, the investors, the people who turned a blind eye to all of this for the sake of profit. We've got the evidence, and it's all lined up." Alicia smiled faintly, her confidence growing with each passing minute. "Let's do it then. Let's tear it all down. Every single one of them needs to see that this will never happen again. The world needs to understand that we are not going to stay silent any longer." Nia turned to leave, but Alicia stopped her. "And make sure Vincent knows this wasn't just a business decision. This is personal. He tried to crush me. He tried to crush people like me. But now, he's going to see what happens when you mess with the wrong person." Alicia stood up from her chair, her mind already moving ahead. The world was changing, and she wasn't going to stop until it was completely transformed. She had started a revolution, but it wasn't just about tearing things down, it was about building something new. A world where people like her could thrive, where the rules weren't stacked against them. She was going to make sure that no one could ever silence her, or anyone else, ever again. Alicia had won the first battle, but now, it was time to win the war. The storm was finally starting to hit, and Alicia could feel the weight of everything she had done settling in. The media coverage was relentless, articles, interviews, and news stories flooding in from every direction. The public was captivated by her story, the black CEO who had taken on the billionaire elite and won. But Alicia knew this was far from over. She was only just beginning to tear apart the system that had kept her, and so many others, on the outside. She sat at her desk, eyes fixed on the large screen in front of her, watching as the press began to report on the latest developments. Vincent Hunt's name was everywhere now, his empire collapsing under the weight of the truth Alicia had uncovered. The statements from the former employees, the investors, the witnesses who had seen the corruption firsthand, everything was coming to light. But there was still so much more to be done. She had exposed Vincent, but the real challenge lay in what came next. How could she make sure this never happened again? How could she make sure that the people who were still benefiting from a broken system would face the same consequences? Alicia's phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. It was a message from Nia *. "The board members are being contacted. We've got their names, their deals, and we're ready to go public with everything. They're not getting away with this." Alicia's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. This was it. The dominoes were beginning to fall, and no one was safe. "Make sure they know exactly what's at stake," Alicia texted back. "This isn't just about taking down one man. This is about holding every single person in this system accountable." Her eyes remained focused on the screen, as if she could will the next phase of her plan into motion. The system had been built to benefit the powerful, to keep people like her out, but Alicia had learned how to navigate it, how to break it apart piece by piece. The plan was simple: expose the truth, drag the guilty into the light, and make them pay for every life they had destroyed. The next few weeks would be crucial. Alicia had already taken everything from Vincent, but now she needed to make sure that no one could rebuild what he had lost. No one could come in and fill the void he had left. She had to make sure that his network crumbled, that the power he had wielded would never be replaced by anyone else. The world needed to see that it wasn't just about money, it was about justice, about ensuring that the people who had been trampled on for so long were finally given the opportunity to rise. Alicia's thoughts were interrupted by another message. It was from her legal team. *. "We've filed the suits against the remaining board members. They won't be able to hide." *. Alicia nodded, her heart steady. This was what she had been working toward all along. "Keep pressing," she typed back. "Make sure they know we're not stopping until every last one of them is exposed. This isn't a negotiation. This is the beginning of their downfall." She leaned back in her chair, letting the weight of it all sink in. Her journey had been long, filled with obstacles and setbacks, but it had all led her here. The moment had arrived. Alicia had become the force they had underestimated, the one they had never seen coming. She wasn't just playing the game anymore, she was changing it. And when it was all over, the world would look different. No one would ever be able to say that people like her didn't belong in the rooms they had once been locked out of. The revolution had begun, and Alicia was in the driver's seat. The weight of the world seemed to be shifting, and Alicia could feel it as she watched her empire grow, piece by piece. The fallout from Vincent Hunt's downfall was bigger than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just the businesses he ran, or the wealth he amassed. It was the ripple effect of every corrupt deal, every dishonest transaction, and every person he had exploited to climb to the top. Alicia had been patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, the world was watching as she took control of it all. The media coverage was relentless, each headline more damning than the last. They were finally hearing the truth about Vincent, about the system that had been built to protect the privileged while crushing the lives of those they deemed beneath them. It wasn't just about the financial takeover anymore. It was about the justice these people thought they could avoid. As Alicia sat at her desk, reviewing the endless reports, she felt a sense of calm that she had never experienced before. This wasn't a victory. It was the beginning of something far greater. The system, as flawed and corrupt as it was, would never be the same again. She had made sure of that. The emails, the statements, the legal action, it was all part of a plan that was playing out perfectly. Every step she took was a calculated move to dismantle the empire these men had built, brick by brick. But Alicia knew the real work had just begun. There was still so much left to do. Vincent's empire was crumbling, but there were others who had benefited from his corruption, others who had made sure the system stayed rigged. These were the people Alicia needed to focus on next. She wasn't going to stop until every last one of them was exposed for the role they had played in keeping people like her out. The door to her office opened, and Nia entered, her expression determined. "The board members are rattled," she said, walking up to the desk and placing a file down in front of Alicia. "We've got everything we need on them. We're moving forward with the full audit of their assets, and we've already reached out to their investors. They won't have a place to hide." Alicia took a deep breath, feeling the fire in her chest grow stronger. "Good, but we need to make sure they feel the pressure. We can't let up. They need to know they're next. We need to strip them of everything." She glanced at the file, nodding to herself as she read the first few lines. This was exactly what she needed. The puzzle pieces were coming together. "And don't forget," Alicia added, her eyes narrowing with determination, "we need to make sure the media doesn't lose focus. Keep the stories about Vincent's corruption front and center, but make sure people know this goes deeper. Much deeper." Nia nodded. "We'll keep the narrative tight, Alicia. The public's attention is on us, and we're not letting it go." Alicia stood up from her desk, her hands resting on the surface as she looked out over the city. The skyscrapers gleamed in the distance, but her eyes weren't focused on the view. They were locked on the future. She had made it this far, and now she was going to make sure no one could ever go back to the way things were. The game had changed, and Alicia Walker was the one who had changed it. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with, and no one, no matter how powerful or wealthy, was going to stop her. "Make sure everything is ready," she said, her voice steady but powerful. "The world is about to see just how far I'm willing to go. And when this is all over, they'll know that nothing, no matter how entrenched, is beyond my reach." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Alicia sat in her office, a steady hum of the city outside her windows. The weight of the past few weeks was still fresh, but her resolve had only grown stronger. The plans she had set in motion were unfolding perfectly. The legal documents, the press releases, the public statements, everything was moving in tandem, each piece aligning to create a wave of change that could not be stopped. Vincent Hunt had been the first, but now, it was time for the rest to fall. Alicia had begun to make waves that were going to take down not just one man but an entire network of corrupt individuals who thought they were untouchable. She wasn't going to stop until every last one of them paid for their role in the system of inequality that had defined the corporate world for so long. Her phone buzzed again, breaking her thoughts. It was Nia, sending the latest update. Asterisk. The press coverage is through the roof. We've got top-level executives in full damage control mode. Their PR teams are scrambling. Asterisk. Alicia read the message and smiled. She had expected this. It was always easier to control the narrative when you were the one who held all the power. She immediately replied. Asterisk. Good. Keep the pressure on. We need to ensure the world knows what they did. Don't let them sweep this under the rug. Asterisk. Putting the phone down, Alicia leaned back in her chair, taking in the view once more. The city lights flickered below, but her mind wasn't on the skyline. It was focused on what lay ahead. She had already taken down Vincent, but the real work had always been about dismantling the system he represented. It wasn't just his empire that had to go. It was the mindset, the culture of power that believed it could oppress others with no consequences. It was time to break the cycle once and for all. She had been patient, building her career, learning the rules of the game, understanding the ways of the elite. But now, she had the power to change everything. The world was beginning to realize that people like Alicia, people who had been kept on the sidelines for so long, had been quietly building their own empires, their own paths to power. They just needed the right moment to strike. Alicia wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. She wasn't going to let the system continue as it had. Alicia stood up from her desk, her eyes fixed on the files in front of her, files that detailed the deals, the lies, and the backdoor agreements that had kept the rich and powerful in charge. She wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Nia stepped in, a determined look on her face. We've got confirmation. The board members are starting to feel the heat. Some of them are already distancing themselves from Vincent, trying to wash their hands of everything. Alicia nodded. Let them. It's exactly what we want. Let them turn on each other. Let them reveal how deep this goes. She turned to Nia, her gaze sharp. Get me everything we have on their financial ties, their hidden investments. I want to make sure they can't escape this. Nia nodded and quickly left the room to carry out Alicia's orders. Alicia stood by the window, letting the stillness of the night settle in her mind. The battle was far from over, but she was winning. She had already claimed victory over those who had once tried to silence her, but now it was time to make sure the world would never forget. This was more than a personal win, it was a revolution that would reshape everything, and Alicia was going to lead it. She knew what needed to be done, and she would stop at nothing until every corrupt figure in the system had been exposed for who they truly were. The reckoning had only just begun. The final blow was coming, and Alicia could feel it in the air. The calm before the storm was palpable, but she was more than ready for what was next. She had dismantled Vincent's empire, exposed the corrupt network of powerful men who had thought they were untouchable, and now it was time to ensure that no one would ever attempt to rebuild what they had lost. As Alicia sat in her office, the city outside her windows looked almost serene, but inside, the tension was electric. Every move she had made over the past few weeks had been calculated, deliberate, and precise, and now it was all leading to this moment. The game was almost over, but Alicia knew it wasn't just about taking down the people who had oppressed her. It was about making sure that the system they had created could never be used against people like her again. She had already claimed victory, but now it was time to make sure that victory was permanent. Alicia's phone buzzed, and she glanced down at the screen. It was a message from Nia. Asterisk. We've got the full audit on all the assets. The remaining board members are being forced to resign. Their legal teams are scrambling to protect what's left. Asterisk. Alicia smiled faintly as she read the message. It was exactly what she wanted. The final pieces were falling into place. And now, there was no stopping it. The world was finally waking up to the truth, and the truth was that power was not just about money, or status, or connections. It was about control, and Alicia had it. She immediately typed back. Asterisk. Good. Make sure it's all on record. We want to make sure the public knows just how deep this goes. This isn't just about one man. This is about an entire system built to keep people like us out. She hit send, then turned back to her desk, her thoughts racing. She was no longer just a CEO. She was a symbol of change, a force that had turned the tables on those who had never once imagined being held accountable. The fight was far from over, but the groundwork had been laid. Naya entered the room a moment later, a stack of papers in hand. She looked at Alicia, her expression filled with both admiration and respect. Everything is in place. The final press release is ready. We've secured interviews with key witnesses, and the press is ready to go live with the full story. Alicia nodded, her eyes steely with focus. Perfect. Let's make sure they understand this isn't just a story. This is a message. A message to everyone who's ever been silenced, dismissed, or ignored. A message that says we will never be pushed aside again. Naya gave a quick nod and stepped out to finalize everything. Alicia stood up from her desk and walked over to the window. She could feel the city's pulse, its energy matching her own. The world was changing, and she was at the center of it. The empire Vincent had once controlled was gone, but Alicia was already building something new, something better. She had worked for years to get to this point, to navigate the intricacies of a system that was stacked against her. But now, she was going to reshape that system. No one, not the richest man, not the most powerful individual, could ever again claim that people like her didn't belong. Alicia had proven that anything was possible with the right strategy, the right mindset, and the unshakable determination to fight for what was right. As she looked out over the city, Alicia felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had won, but more importantly, she had created a new world for others like her, a world where they would no longer be silenced, a world where no one would ever have to fight just to be seen. The revolution she had started was no longer just a personal victory, it was a global one, a triumph for every single person who had ever been pushed down, overlooked, or denied their rightful place. And as she turned back to face her desk, her resolve was clearer than ever. The game was hers now, and no one would ever take that away from her.